On June 27, 2009, Lyndon LaRouche conducted a webcast dialogue with what remains of America's political intelligentsia. In this discussion, LaRouche emphasized to these leaders that they must prepare themselves intellectually to step into the void of power in Washington which will be created when the Obama administration self-destructs, to enact the sudden shift in policy necessary to save the world from the ongoing general breakdown crisis of the world economic system. This characterization of the current economic collapse as a systemic breakdown crisis is not some sort of generalized terminology original to LaRouche, nor is it in any way hyperbole. LaRouche made this point clearly, that this crisis is in fact none other than a general breakdown crisis of the entire planetary system. In a question asked of Mr. LaRouche by a fellow leading American economist, this economist made the crucial point that the recent $1 trillion bailout of the banks foretells a hyperinflationary situation in the United States, resembling what occurred in Weimar Germany. Yet, at the same time, the collapse of production and employment in the United States threatens deflation worse than that which we faced during the Great Depression. So this adds up to a very unique situation. We seem to be facing a mixture of inflation and deflation, different than anything the United States has faced before, and requiring, therefore, a different response.
Well, as I've often said in covering this thing, the problem is we're not in a depression. We're in a general breakdown crisis of the entire planetary system. This was discussed hypothetically in the 1890s and the beginning of the 20th century. That such a thing could occur. And it is occurring. We are in a general breakdown crisis in which the fact, yes, there is inflation and deflation at the same time. But that, if you look at my triple curve, you see exactly what that is, what that means. It's there. That's the problem. So the problem is we have to define the thing as a breakdown crisis. That means there is no solution within the terms of the parameters which are currently operating. In other words, you cannot take the dimensionalities of the present situation as parameters, and by adjusting the parameters, or even throwing in a new parameter, you're not going to prevent the thing from collapsing.
The hypothetical idea of the possibility of such a general breakdown crisis of the system originates in the work of two profoundly insightful economists of the 19th and early 20th centuries. These two economists, Rosa Luxemburg of Poland and Jean Jaurès of France, stand out still today as head and shoulders above the present generation of economists, politicians, and academics generally. Lyndon LaRouche has repeatedly identified Rosa Luxemburg's 1913 book, The Accumulation of Capital, which, as he says, provides the appropriate starting point for understanding the origins of the general global economic breakdown crisis currently in progress today. Her insights in this book will provide us the grounding from which to look at the true cause of the economic nightmare looming today. Since the victory of the American colonies over the British in 1783, the world has been divided between two systems, the ancient system of imperialism and the newly established system of American-style republic. All of the conflicts and all of the wars since that time globally have been caused by the turbulence created by the impossible coexistence of these two opposing and contradictory systems. In 1871, a few years following Abraham Lincoln's defeat of the British-sponsored Confederacy in the American Civil War, Rosa Luxemburg was born. Her home was the Polish town of Zamość, a beautiful 16th century city in the eastern part of the country, diverse in culture and known as the home of the Jewish Enlightenment in Poland. Zamość was the home of leading Jewish poets, mathematicians, writers, including the famous Eyal Peretz, known as the father of the Yiddish Renaissance. These various Jewish intellects were all politically organized as members of the Jewish Bund, an underground labor movement whose clandestine meetings were often broken up by Tsarist police, its members sent to prison or exile. One prominent member of the Bund in Zamość was Abraham Luxemburg, the father of Rosa. Crippled, treated as an outcast, Rosa Luxemburg spent her childhood studying the ideas of Friedrich Schiller and other writers of the German classical movement, influenced by the intellectual and political movement surrounding her father and the Bund. By the age of 16, she became politically active, immediately rising to a position of leadership in the political movement that she joined. But when her party was cracked down on by the authorities, its leaders either hung or imprisoned, Luxemburg left Poland for Zurich. In Switzerland, she enrolled at university, studying mathematics, natural science, political economy, and law. Writing as her dissertation a book-length economic study of her homeland, the industrial development of Poland, Luxemburg decided to begin to organize around her political and economic theories immediately upon leaving university. She went directly to Germany, where the labor movement had reached an advanced stage of organization and influence among the industrial workers in that country. But when she arrived, she found that this movement was being splintered and disorganized by a faction calling themselves reformists who were attempting to subvert the political identity of the social democratic movement. These reformists advocated the adoption of the British parliamentary system of government as their political model for Germany. Luxemburg knew that any compromise with the British system of both government and economy would eliminate the entire reason for the existence of the social democratic movement itself, knowing that such a compromise would be deadly, and that the social democratic movement would eventually just be assimilated into the very system of empire which they were supposedly fighting against. As World War I broke out, Luxemburg's fears about the weaknesses of the Social Democrats of Germany were vindicated. Instead of resisting Germany's involvement in the war, a war instigated by the geopolitical manipulations of the British Empire, the Social Democratic leadership threw their wholehearted support behind the war effort. The political identity of the Social Democratic Party was lost. Germany was bankrupted and destroyed, on the track to be gutted and crushed by the British-organized Versailles Treaty after the war. Luxemburg published The Accumulation of Capital in 1913, on the eve of the Great War, and her famous follow-up piece, the so-called Anti-Kritik, shortly after the war began. In these two writings, she presents a uniquely scientific approach to the subject of modern imperialism. Luxemburg identifies the principle of empire beyond mere particular cases, in a way that allows us to trace the genetic history of such a system like we would with a disease, from the current-day British Empire all the way back to its ancestral roots in Venice, Rome, the ancient empire of Babylon, and beyond. This is where our insight into the nature of the systemic breakdown crisis begins to be enriched by the work of Luxemburg. Her work on the subject of financial imperialism was, at one time, understood among some American political intelligence circles, including the well-known economic historian Herbert Feiss, economic advisor for international affairs at the State Department under Franklin Roosevelt. Herbert Feiss documented the case for this same argument on the subject of modern imperialism in his book Europe, the World's Banker, published in 1930, which shows that Rosa Luxemburg, in her analysis of imperialism, was absolutely correct.